Hello everybody, I'm Ducky. Today we're going to be taking a look into Black Ops 4 Zombies' new storyline, diverging away from the old Ether storyline with this whole new set of lore to explore. So I'm going to be taking a look into what the Ancient Order may actually be. This is part 1 of my series looking into this, and this is how they originated. I'd like to thank Nixaru, who's mentioned quite a lot in this investigation actually, as well as Eric Maynard of the Woolaz for giving me a hand reading through this lore investigation and making sure it's ready to release. It is important to start this lore investigation with a key point. None of what is reported here may actually be true human history, but is considered to be conspiracy-like theories of the emergence of our modern world, which Treyarch has already presented that they are focusing on with the use of an ancient order for this surface level plot, and have always covered within Zombies mode, making the lore arguably very interesting to investigate, such as Harp in Transit.
Welcome aboard. Please secure all personal belongings and take your seat. Now departing for the Harp Research Station.
Or Die Glock in Deriz. I'd also like to make note of a few key words used by Jason Blundell and Craig Houston in the Black Ops 4 community reveal event. These may be idioms or general phrases, but probably worth noting them. We'll come to them later in the theory.
The Zombies community has always been our North Star.
Black Ops 4 marks the beginning of a brand new storyline, separate and distinct from the Ether story. A new world with new characters and new enemies. Drawing from history, both real and mythical, Black Ops 4 Zombies will introduce us to a new enemy, an ancient order, hell-bent on transforming the world.
This piece is not designed to be a theory of what's going on, although I may point out a few parallels that are worth mentioning and speculating, but a set of tools for devising your own theories about what this new chapter of Zombies involves storyline-wise. Graham Hancock has many times explained the links between ancient symbolism and astronomical events in his books. He details how the Earth's axis of rotation itself rotates through 360 degrees around the axis perpendicular to the plane of the solar system, i.e. the axis going through the North Pole and South Pole. This leads to, at different times throughout history, the same point on Earth pointing to or seeing the equinoctial rising of different stellar constellations. Hancock details which zodiac symbols may be significant at any point in the history of the time on Earth. Imagine a circle which represents the ecliptic, i.e. the annual path of the Sun, and to mark out at equal intervals around the circumference of this circle the 12 constellations of the zodiac. Now place 4 spokes arranged in the form of a cross inside the circle. You have one of the 4 key stations of the Sun: the Northern Hemisphere's spring equinox on the 21st of March, the summer solstice, which is the 21st of June, the autumn equinox, which is the 21st of September, and the winter solstice, which is the 21st of December. In our epoch, the zodiacal constellations housing the Sun at these 4 stations are Pisces on the spring equinox, Gemini on the summer solstice, Virgo on the autumn equinox, and Sagittarius on the winter solstice. You may be aware that each of these zodiac constellations has a symbol, usually an animal which the star appears to form the shape of. We see this across multiple different societies. Christianity uses the symbol of the fish representing Pisces. Giza in Egypt has a statue, the Sphinx, looking directly true east at the rising sun on the spring equinox. The Sphinx itself is a lion, which is the symbol for Leo, also staring directly at the constellation of Leo, the shape of the lion, at a point in history and again in future. Therefore, the symbols we see on devices which zombify an area in this new story could actually be representative of the time and location, the ancient civilization they come from. This is why I believe the mention of North Star by Jason was not an idiom. We can see the 2 devices similar in shape and function both in 9 and Voyage of Despair, but they contain different decorations. The device in Voyage is hard to make out, but that of 9 is clear. It's a snake. There are many different interpretations of what the symbol of the snake could mean across different cultures. The Chinese use it as a symbol of one of their years. Quetzalcoatl was one of the great civilizers to bring advanced technology and societal behaviours to Central America in Aztec and Mayan mythology. He is one of those who could have been a survivor of Atlantis, which we'll visit later, and he took the form of a fish. Other references can be viewed on the large list of snake gods on Wikipedia linked in the description if you wish to find some other possible connections of your own. Nonetheless, the key period at which the origins of the device seen in 9 may be determined by going back through the ages at certain time intervals where we see this symbol. But first, let's take a look at how aware the ancients were to the processional cycle and how they encoded it. One of the things that stood out to me in Nixaru's video is in the Bible's Revelation, a chapter which describes the destruction of the world and creation of a new world.
The woman fled into the wilderness to a place prepared for her by God, where she might be taken care of for 1,260 days.
Before we start interpreting this as literally days, we should consider the day-year principle, where a day described in ancient texts due to the cosmic scale supreme beings would have considered to be operating on is actually a year. Why this stuck out to me is because it is a multiple of 72, the number of years for 1 degree of the 360 degree precessional cycle to pass. Factoring out 72 from this number gives 17.5 degrees, so that's 17.5 degrees of the precessional cycle. I know this doesn't give an integer answer, but it is a dead-on figure of 17.5. This shows that ancients measured time over the course of thousands of years using the study of stars, which is why we see a lot of symbolism throughout the history of ages to do with animals represented by stars. However, it should be noted different civilizations interpreted the same constellation with different symbols. A similar case can be seen from mythology that is considered to be even more ancient. It is thought that the story of Osiris is a metaphor, as there are lots of codes within the story. A website aware of this idea describes it. In legend, Thoth had played a game of draughts with the moon and won from him a 72nd part of his light, from which he created an extra 5 days in the year. Prior to that time, there were 360 days in the ancient Egyptian calendar. Osiris's wicked brother Set, who wanted the throne of Egypt, murdered him. The plan was to induce Osiris to lie down in a magnificent coffer under the pretext of a game at a banquet. Set and his 72 conspirators immediately closed the lid and threw the coffer into the Nile. You should note the amount of time 72 is repeated within that story or that tale. As I've already mentioned, that is the number of years it takes for 1 degree of the precessional cycle to pass. It is therefore likely that all mythologies have the same source, an ancient order preserving their message across different civilizations, so that if one does not survive time, others will. The ancient order we see in Black Ops 4 Zombies may not be exactly the same as this, however that is what the ancient order is, and is likely we will see a very similar idea to this explored. I'm not saying the symbols that we see are certainly indicative of a time period, but will certainly have a link to the stars, as I've shown the ancients studied them well. I would personally believe that all of these devices were constructed at the same time by different civilizations, told to do so by the civilizers from the lost world, and then have a destiny to be reunited someday when the world is transformed to fulfill their nefarious agenda. As Jason Blundell seemed to indicate that the new storyline would be a fetch-style quest at the round table with members of the Zombies community, as noted by Nixaru in his informative livestream. The best reference point to start from to provide some lore on what most theories of ancient orders stem from is Atlantis. The overview is that there was a highly advanced society with technology and social evolution beyond our understanding. Secret orders, especially those labelled as ancient, attempted to revive this civilization in our modern world. One of the oldest known references to an ancient advanced society exists in the inscriptions on the walls of the Edfu building near the Nile in Egypt, where they speak of an early primeval age of the gods. Graham Hancock, investigator of lost civilizations, details the inscriptions in his book Magicians of the Gods. The gods lived in a sacred island, the homeland of the primeval ones, in the midst of a great ocean. Then a terrible disaster, a true cataclysm of blood and fire, overtook the island, where the earliest mansions of the gods had been founded. It should also be noted that it is thought that what the ancient Egyptians inscribed on the Edfu building was copied from more ancient texts, which they believed should be preserved. With the spread of Islam trying to destroy texts opposing their story of creation, the committed priests of the Edfu building made sure to inscribe the texts deep into the blocks that were the core structure of the building, so that anyone who tried to remove the blocks would have the entire building collapse down on them. We can therefore conclude that whoever tried to preserve this information for the future tried very hard to make sure it would survive time. Plato, a Greek philosopher who spent time studying Heliopolis, Egypt, popularised the idea of Atlantis. Also, whatever fragrant things there are now on earth, all these that sacred island which then beheld the light of the sun brought forth fair and wondrous in infinite abundance. There exists a papyrus in Moscow P. Leningrad 1115 which tells the tale of the shipwrecked sailor. Then the ship died. Of course in it not one remained. I was cast on an island by the sea. I spent 3 days alone. I found figs and grapes there, all sorts of fine vegetables, sycamore figs and cucumbers that were as if tendered. Fish there were, and fowl. There is nothing that was not there. This island by the sea was described as having everything in abundance, as if farmed and mass-produced where a traditional ancient explorer had found the modern-day world. I heard a thundering noise. Trees splintered, the ground trembled. Uncovering my face, I found it was a snake that was coming. The ancients tended to use symbolism for objects they couldn't describe. It is likely this appearance of the snake was the trail left behind a comet, and the thundering noise was it beginning to burst. Although the sailor states that the snake had a conversation with him. The snake said, "It is God who let you live and brought you to this island of the car. There is nothing that is not upon it." Ka is the idea of the human double in the spiritual realm. In fact, ancient Egyptian for death means to go to one's car in the sky. Osiris, whose story we've already told, also has links to the Ka. He was the Ka of the pyramids of Giza. The snake continues, "I was here with my brothers and there were children with them. The snake gave them great lumps of incense, elephants' tusks, greyhounds, all kinds of precious things. This is as if the snake is trying to preserve that which is being lost to the flood by giving them to someone who is travelling away from the island. When you have left this place, you will not see this island again. It will have become water." The formation of a new world can be described as a genesis, which happens to be the original name of the zombie map Revelations. Within Nixaru's Zombie Secrets in the Bible video, he reads excerpts from the Bible and links them to the zombies map Revelations. He reads one excerpt from Revelation, which describes the destruction of our world and the creation of God's new world.
I saw the holy city, the new Jerusalem, coming out of heaven from God, prepared as a bride beautifully dressed for her husband.
Alternate history believes that rather than cities lowering from above, we went upwards towards them ourselves. The idea is that Atlantis washed away in a big flood. The rest of the world experienced this too. This would have resulted in sea levels rising, so what is actually being described here is that the locations that were once considered to be high on mountaintops were now a lot closer to sea level, not because they came down, but because sea level went up. This means that a lot of old civilizations were lost under the increased sea level and new ones started on lands which were considered too high to be civilized before the flood. The oldest acknowledged civilization, the Sumer, created cuneiform tablets telling the story also of how the first cities were lowered from heaven. The start of our civilization is described as starting by the Ancient History Encyclopedia. According to the Sumerian king list, when the gods first gave human beings the gifts necessary for cultivating society, they did so by establishing the city of Eridu in the region of the Sumer. The encyclopedia's page on Eridu also describes a similar event to that which occurs in the Bible. The Eridu Genesis is the earliest description of the Great Flood, predating the biblical book of Genesis, and is the tale of the good man Utnapishtim, also known as Atreisis or Ziusudra, who builds a great boat by the will of the gods and gathers inside the seed of life. The Euphrates rose high above her banks and flooded the region. Although we will not go into detail as it is beyond the scope of this investigation, the Sumerian civilization has many more traditions which are also told of in the Bible, such as the garden where someone became cursed from eating a fruit from a forbidden tree, similar to the tale of Adam and Eve at the start of civilization. There are lots of descriptions of great floods and evidence found of tsunamis occurring throughout the far ancient times. According to official history, these floods occurred at different periods due to different causes. Alternate history believes that some of these floods may have been the same one. One theory is that the flood which destroyed Atlantis is that due to a comet impact at the end of the Ice Age, causing the ice sheets to melt rapidly. The The full case for this is made within Graham Hancock's Magicians of the Gods, which I'll refer you to should you find interest in reading about any of this further. However, for the case of this lore investigation, we shall just consider it was believed to be a comet causing the destruction of Atlantis, which the ancients, due to trying to explain it to the new civilization without an understanding of astronomy, described as a snake, as it would be the only way they could understand it and know that destruction is coming if they see another snake in the sky. A Sumerian tablet details how a ruler was warned by a god that a flood was coming and was instructed to build a large boat which he takes many of seeds of life on. This is plants and animals. In addition, it appears ancient Mesopotamian sites were deliberately buried before the flood so that they could be dug up and understood by future civilizations in order to warn them of future cataclysms, similar to the idea of trying to preserve that of their past society. For example, the site of Göbekli Tepe is covered in inscriptions of animals which have been determined to be possible depictions of stellar constellations, giving us dates of their existence and warnings of future events, due to predicting the interception of our orbit with that of deadly comets. We've already explored their awareness of using the stars as a cosmic calendar. We've already seen the story of Noah and how he constructed an ark to also preserve life after being warned by a god in a very similar case. In Egypt, the pyramids may have been built as arks, most likely preserving knowledge, not life. There have been many explorations of the numeric significance to the pyramids. An article by Scott Onstott details how using trigonometry on the angles in the pyramid produces sides and values with factors of pi, phi and e, three fundamental numbers to mathematics which weren't discovered until thousands of years after the pyramids were built. In addition, the Great Pyramid is said to contain to scale dimensions of Earth and the distance of it to the Moon. All of this was carefully thought out by an ancient order trying to transmit their knowledge, which may be lost by cataclysms, into the future for us to discover. Furthermore, the layout of the pyramids of Giza, as found by Robert Bauval, are a ground plan of the constellation of Orion, as well as having shafts aligning with other stars at certain points in the precessional cycle which we know they had knowledge of. Similar to the Sumerian and biblical stories, across the world, in the Americas, the traditions speak of some being warned before the coming flood and being told to climb to the tops of the tallest mountains. The story is detailed by Oren's website. A large, rich city once existed on the Antiplano. One day, a group of ragged Indians came and warned the proud inhabitants that the city would be destroyed by earthquake, flood and fire. Most inhabitants just scoffed and eventually had the ragged people flogged and thrown out. Some of the city's priests, though, heeded the warning and went to live as hermits in a temple on a hill. Sometime later, a red cloud appeared on the horizon. Soon it had grown and covered the area, and its red glow eerily lit the night. Suddenly, with a flash and a rumble, an earthquake destroyed many of the city's buildings, and a red rain poured down. Other earthquakes and more rain followed, and a flood soon covered the ruined city. This water is Lake Titicaca today. None of the city's inhabitants survived save the priests. The descendants of the prophets became known as the Callaways, wise men of the valleys. These tallest mountains are likely where modern civilization considers essentially the ground level today, as the flood would have caused sea levels to increase just as the Bible talks of cities descending from the sky. The orange cloud and flash are reminiscent of a comet explosion in the distance, which would have caused the large flood, due to the melting of ice caps which followed. The point is that all of these very separate civilizations across the world were warned of the coming flood. They claim through gods, but we know that ancient gods are much more likely references to celestial bodies where trained individuals aware of stellar alignments would have known that the sky could represent a specific period of time. All of these geographically separate civilizations with similar mythology also tell of mystical figures bringing them the foundations of society. Mesopotamia in Eastern Europe and the West Middle East had a figure known as Oannes. According to the Encyclopaedia Britannica, Oannes was an amphibious being who taught mankind wisdom. Oannes, as described by the Babylonian priest Berosus, had the form of a fish, but with the head of a man under his fish's head, and under his fish's tail the feet of a man. In the daytime he came up to the seashore of the Persian Gulf and instructed mankind in the writing, the arts and the sciences. The Aztecs in Central America talk of a similar figure bringing their ancestors the same traits of society despite being across the world. You will notice how Oannes has a bag or bucket in his hand, and Graham Hancock describes how Quetzalcoatl carries a similar device. In a sculpture from the Olmec site of La Venta, overlooking the Gulf of Mexico, a relief of Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent, the legendary bringer of civilization to the peoples of Central America, carries an identical bag. Both figures are similar in that they are derived from an animal and depicted with similar items, and most importantly that they brought the traits of civilization to a world which had just recovered from a cataclysmic event. These civilizers are thought to be either the same person or members of the same group trying to rebuild civilization to what it was during the Atlantean times before the Great Flood which destroyed it. Whether we see a direct reference to this within Black Ops 4 Zombies or just as a metaphor, like so many parts of Zombies already, is yet to be seen. Either way, it can be seen that the Ancient Order brought their occult-like behaviours to different societies across the world. Considering the full season of Black Ops 4 Zombies, we are likely to see many other mythologies and their symbols brought into this storyline, all of which will probably have a device similar to those seen in Voyage of Despair and 9, just with a different symbol representing their mythos or civilization. What we need to consider is that all of these different civilizations and mythologies stemmed from one ancient world that was destroyed. It is as if the devices were created, waiting to be brought back together, or more likely activated when the new civilization envisaged by the Ancient Order was created. The whole idea of the Ancient Order is only considered in brief here, however there are many other links related to this image of the ancient world, however I believe I've presented enough references for this lore investigation. The points made throughout this are not necessarily true and aren't necessarily taken into official history books, but are considered alternate history, which I have no doubt Black Ops 4 Zombies will derive from due to the presence of other alternate ideas already present in the series as discussed in the preface. I've had a lot of fun exploring these ideas as I've long suspected them to appear into Zombies, and some of them have already been present within the Ether storyline. This lore piece focuses on where the Ancient Order originated, but as we've seen maps in later times, 9 in the late Ancient period and Voyage of Despair in the modern period, this order must have had to survive time up to this point and not get lost as the Atlantean civilizers feared. This survival is what I shall explore in the next part of this series.